Hello, everyone, and welcome to No Off Season. I'm Ben Pickman.
And I'm Sabreena Merchant.
And Sabreena, we have a bonus episode for everybody because on Thursday night, Fever star guard Caitlin Clark announced on social media that she would miss the remainder of the 2025 season and the postseason as she continues to rehab her groin injury. We're going to get into that, both what we know about the injury, what the injury means for both Clark and the Fever in the short term and in the long term, and we're going to talk about her second professional season as a whole. But Sabreena, as we dive into this emergency bonus pod, let's just start with the news at hand. What came out on Thursday night? What do we now know that maybe we didn't have as much clarity on before?
Right. So Caitlin last played a game on July 15th. That was when the Indiana Fever and Connecticut Sun had their WNBA Boston game. She injures her right groin in the final minute of that game. It's a very emotional scene, right? She walks to the other end of the court, sort of bangs her head against the stanchion. Her eyes are welling up as she walks back to the bench. In the moment, you're thinking, oh, crap, Caitlin's not going to be there for All-Star, which was held in Indianapolis this year. And she still has not played in the entire second half of the season. There were some reports that she might be getting back to practice. That did not happen. And now we officially have confirmation that no more regular season games for Caitlin. And even if the Indiana Fever make the playoffs, she will not be appearing in those games. So her 2025 season reduced to 13 games out of a potential 44 plus more.
We should say that Caitlin did, not get back to any contact practices. We did see video over, recent days of her getting back on the court, kind of working out in seemingly non-contact settings with teammates, kind of wearing shorts, running around. But you're totally right. Like, the last we saw of Caitlin Clark was just before the All-Star game. And it is one of the things that, will stick out in my mind is just the pain, the excruciating pain, and I think disappointment that she was very visibly in at the end of that game against the Connecticut Sun in mid-July. I think it was one of the most emotional scenes we've seen of her, good or bad, right? Against the Sun. So in the final, minute of the game, she bangs her head against the basket stanchion nearest Indiana's bench. Tears appeared to well in her eyes as she gingerly made her way to the sideline. Like, eventually she put a towel over her head, and disappointment was a word that she used when she announced that she wasn't going to participate in the All-Star game just a few days later, and it was again a word we saw her use in the statement that you just alluded to, that you just referenced, Sabreena. She said that, disappointed isn't a big enough word to describe how I am feeling. She has made clear, and she did Sue Bird's podcast, and she echoed this sentiment too, that like she very much wanted to be back not only for herself, but she recognized too that like people spend hundreds, tens, hundreds, thousands of dollars to come see her play. She talked about how when she is out, she has spent more time signing autographs than maybe she would otherwise. And she referenced in her statement on Thursday night, this has been incredibly frustrating, but even in the bad, there is good. That was kind of the overall outlook she had. But you mentioned it, Sabreena. I don't know. Can we start to sum up Caitlin Clark's season or maybe in the shortest term, what does this mean for her recovery and what that might mean for her career going forward?
Well, I would say the best sort of rose-colored way of looking at this is that if Caitlin was taking this long to determine if she could come back, then this is the type of injury that should not linger into 2026. So if you're an Indiana Fever fan, you should have confidence, I think, that Caitlin Clark can return to her 2024 self when the Fever resume the next WNBA season, whenever that is. But again, the fact that it took this long to rule her out makes me think that she should be able to be back April, May, whenever the Indiana Fever need her in 2026, which is a good thing. It does mean, however, that Indiana will have to go into the postseason without Caitlin Clark. We saw them sort of manage to weather her initial absence with Ari McDonald and Sydney Colson, but now both of them are out for the season. Sophia Cunningham is out for the season. A buried piece of news on Thursday when Caitlin announced her failure to return is that Chloe Bibby, another midseason signing that the Fever made, is also out for the remainder of the season. So there's just a lot of personnel turnover, a lot of personnel absences in Indiana that are going to be difficult to overcome as they try to make, a run in the postseason. I don't want to take away any of their possibilities, but to me, this is a first round exit team. I don't really care if they make the 8 seed, the 7 seed. This is not a team that is going to challenge Minnesota or Las Vegas without Caitlin Clark available. And that's just a real bummer because this, you were in Indiana at the start of the season. Like Caitlin Clark said, the goal was championship. And maybe that wasn't the expectation, but that was the goal. And being in the 8 seed, having not even secured a playoff berth with a week left in the regular season is not what anybody expected of this Indiana Fever team.
I want to hit the Fever stuff in a second, like what it means for them in the postseason and in the long term. But I want to go back to kind of what you were saying about her season overall, because I think we should spend just like one more minute on it. Because you mentioned the kind of rose colored glasses, like that if she was getting back to the court or trying to get back to the court, it would certainly signal that she will be fine in the start of 2026. And Amber Cox, the team's GM, in a statement that the Fever put out, kind of acknowledged that basically ultimately time is not on our side. That was the quote from her, which seems to indicate like, yes, obviously this has been a serious injury, but they almost just ran out of days in the schedule more than anything else. And again, Indiana has been consistent about saying, we're thinking about the long term here. You know, Caitlin Clark obviously just in her second season. I mean, if you want to go to the rosiest of rose colored glasses and we kind of go to basketball history for a second, and this might be a comparison people see. Think about Michael Jordan, and that is often a comparison that people make as it relates to Caitlin Clark. But Michael Jordan, in his second season in the NBA, the 1985-86 season, he played just 18 regular season games, suffered a foot fracture that year. Now, Michael Jordan did close out the regular season and play in 3 playoff games, but the next year, fully healthy, I think he returned and was second in the MVP voting. He averaged more than 30 points per game. And obviously, the rest is history, as they say, as it relates to his career. So, you know, for those who are saying, like, what does this mean for Caitlin Clark's overall long-term health, her tenure? Yes, she suffers 4 injuries this year. 4 leg injuries, 4 non-contact injuries. Not how she wanted this season to go, not how anyone wanted this season to go for Indiana or fans of hers, but like that doesn't necessarily mean that going forward, the ceiling of what she could be as a player is any different than what people expected entering this year.
I mean, Michael Jordan came back and set the NBA postseason single game scoring record in his sophomore year with 63 points. So that's something Caitlin Clark's not going to be doing if we're going to make that comparison. But yeah, I think it's important to, set up the context of her sophomore season just with the injuries too, because in those 13 games, she just wasn't the same player that we saw in her rookie year, whether that was a matter of defenses loading up on her in a way that they hadn't in 2024, or just her legs not being underneath her, which is to be expected considering all of the injuries that she dealt with dating back to the preseason, right? She missed one of the preseason games for Indiana. First game she missed as a professional. So, I mean, you look at like her home versus road stats, this was a thing that was just striking to look at. I mean, she was 2 of 35 for the season on the road on 3-pointers. 2 of 35. Like, if you do the math, I think that's about 6% of her 3-pointers. And I know Caitlin takes a lot of tough shots, but that's an insane number. She only averaged 12 points on the road. Her overall 3-point shooting percentage was below 30% for the season. They were 8-5 in the 13 games that she played the Indiana Fever, which admittedly better than the 20-20 that they were in 2024. But we were judging Caitlin off of that second half of the season post-Olympic break, right? When they had gotten past that horrific stretch of schedule and looked like a team that could actually challenge in the WNBA postseason. So, this is a team that hoped to take a step forward. And I think they expected Caitlin to take a step forward, or at least equal the production that she had as a first-team All-WNBA player. And I mean, I think you have to acknowledge that Caitlin took a step back, or at least her production took a step back. The Indiana Fever didn't exactly take a step forward, despite taking a lot of moves during the offseason to make this a championship level team, right? Like you wrote about this. They fired Christy Sides, to hire Steph White and like get a championship worthy coach in the mix. They let go of a bunch of young assets like Melissa Smith and Grace Berger, and they traded away the number 8 pick so they could bring in veterans like Sophie Cunningham and Natasha Howard. And this is a team like that was designed to compete now, to win now. And even though they all said like we're, bringing in a bunch of new pieces, working together, trying to find our chemistry, like windows are short in the WNBA, and this was a year of the window that like kind of just got wasted.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. If I can make one more rosy comparison here, like Caitlin Clark's unbelievable 3-point barrage, against the New York Liberty when she came back, I guess it was the first time in the regular season. That is obviously the high point, I think, of her season. The 3 threes that were all, 30 plus feet and like a 90-second span and a huge game over what were then the New York Liberty. Like that's the moment you're holding on to. But I think your point is a really good one, Sabreena. And, going back, thinking about my conversation with Kelly Krauskopf, the team president at the start of the season, like Kelly was open with me about this idea that the growth plan was accelerated because of the talent of Caitlin Clark, because of the talent of Aaliyah Boston, because of Kelsey Mitchell, who, made her 3rd consecutive All-Star team this year, could be an all-W player because of the success that she has, both Boston and her, the two of them. I guess, like, when you think about then Indiana's offseason going forward, if we're going to jump to this offseason, and again, you teased it at the start, and as we have talked about on many occasions, we don't know when exactly that will be. We don't know when free agency will start. We don't know all the expansion draft rules. So there's a lot of what ifs out there. But what are you kind of doing differently if you're Kelly Krauskopf, if you're Amber Cox in the Indiana Fever front office, knowing that now you have Caitlin Clark coming off an injury and knowing that, frankly, like the DeWanna Bonner move, independent of Caitlin Clark's injury, not successful. And that is just objectively the case because DeWanna Bonner lasted a handful of games. I think Sophie Cunningham was a very good signing till she became one of the 5 Fever players who is now out for the season. But I don't know. What do you do differently if you're in that front office when you're thinking about next year, Indiana Fever 2026 now?
I think 2024 gave a pretty good template of the kind of players who succeed around Caitlin. And it's, people who play hard, who shoot the ball well, who get offensive rebounds, who defend their position. And we've seen, Natasha Howard fit into that. Like she sort of provides, that energy in the paint. Former defensive player of the year, Sophie Cunningham fits that bill. Like Erin McDonald, a great defender at her position. Lexi Hull, a great defender, offensive rebounder. Those archetypes, I think, still make a lot of sense in the team that you're trying to build around Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell. The good news is you have Clark and Boston under contract for at least this next season. Kelsey Mitchell has a decision of whether she wants to come back again, as does every other veteran free agent in the WNBA, which, includes Sophie Cunningham and Natasha Howard and the like. But as you mentioned, like they could lose a player in the expansion draft. They could lose 2 players in the expansion draft. We don't know how the rules are going to work. We don't know if they'll have the money to sign everybody in free agents, if there are going to be adjustments made to rookie salaries that, give Clark and Boston a, slight pay bump, and then they have to fit those in around all the other veterans they're trying to sign. But I, I think I was pretty clear this offseason that I didn't really care for the moves that they made in terms of building the team. And we've talked about how some of those succeeded and some of those didn't. But, this season is sort of borne out, like, what kind of players are going to fit around Clark and Boston, even if those are veterans or not. Like, I don't think you necessarily need players who have, quote unquote, won a championship just because they've won a championship. Like, they have to be the type of players who are going to fit in this system. But I mean, now you have a year in the system and you have a year of knowledge of like how Stephanie White's going to coach, how that coaching staff wants Clark and Boston to work together. And I would kind of approach it the same way, like, personally, that I would have the 2025 season. Obviously not the way that the Fever approached 2025 offseason. I don't think you need necessarily get that much older because, frankly, your young core is a little bit older now. So, I mean, like I said, I think the template has already been put out, and it's just a matter of whether they learned the same lessons from 25 that they did from 24.
I mean, I think the hard thing, though, is, Stephanie White talked at the beginning of the year about wanting to figure out rotations by the start of the All-Star break or by the All-Star break and the start of the second half of the season. And, like, Indiana ends up using 9 different starting lineups at this point in the season. And I don't know how much Indiana really learned in terms of, best 5-player groups or substitution patterns. And I know all that kind of changes year to year based on your roster complexion. But like, there are definitely some key takeaways. We know that the Clark-Boston pair, for instance, when they're healthy, I mean, they are a 1-2 punch that is right at the top of the league. I think, at the time of the injury, I think Caitlin had assisted Aaliyah on more baskets than any other like guard to big in the WNBA, and we have seen them have success. So that is obviously like a big learning, a big takeaway. But I do think some of maybe the things that Indiana hoped to learn this year, they will now have to learn next year. And to your point, Sabreena, that you made, a few minutes ago, like there's only so many years of open windows that teams have. And yes, Caitlin Clark is the kind of player, obviously in her early 20s still. Indiana hopes a decade, at least a decade that they'll have her, and she has a long career ahead of her. But like, opportunities are short, to your point. And, it does feel like things are kind of now pushed back about what Indiana's ceiling could be next year. And I would expect maybe a little bit of a different tenor entering training camp next year too.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that the way you want to build a team around Caitlin doesn't change because of this injury. And admittedly, like you didn't get all of the reps you wanted to in 2025, but you did see Aaliyah Boston take on a larger role as a hub of an offense, and the way she was tasked defensively under Steph White versus Chrissy Sides is different. And I think Indiana took steps forward defensively, and you found some, other roster players like an Erin McDonald, like a Sophie Cunningham, who make sense in this system and who you can hope to bring back in free agency. But I just don't think that, like, because things didn't go well in 2025 that you need to necessarily reevaluate 2026. I mean, it was injuries, right? Like, if anything, you reevaluate your medical staff. But beyond that, I don't really think that there's much from a roster building perspective that needs to change.
Yeah, it is crazy just how many injuries the Indiana Fever have had. And I know they're not alone in that way. The New York Liberty have
Mhm.
obviously been ravaged with injuries this year. We've seen the Dallas Wings. I think they've had injury reports where they've had up to, I want to say, 8 players this year. And I think they've actually used the most players in WNBA history in a single season. I think they've used more than 20 players this year. So, Indiana not alone, but it is striking when you look at 5 different season-ending injuries. Their player development coach earlier this week, Keith Porter, he suffered a torn Achilles. Like, you can't write that stuff when you think about, the Indiana Fever and what this year has meant, what this year has been like, and just the resilience and also the trials that so many people have had to go through.
Absolutely.
Entering the postseason, you touched on it a little bit. We should say the Indiana Fever, as we tape this right now, they still have not clinched a playoff berth. It looks likely that they are in it. They are currently 8th in the standings, up a game and a half on the Los Angeles Sparks. They're still kind of fighting to be an above 500 team. I mean, it was a fact that I wrote in a number of stories at the start of the season. Indiana still has not had a winning season since 2015. You touched on it. I mean, any hope for Indiana in the playoffs? Like, is there any way, you know, getting a game 2 at home? They're likely going to have to play Minnesota or Las Vegas or Atlanta in the or in the first round, depending on how the final seeding shakes out. Like, can they get to 3 games? Do you give them any puncher's chance, or you just, cross them off right off the bat?
I mean, I don't know that like 3 games is any big deal. Like, they have a good home court, but I mean, we're recording this like right after Minnesota and Vegas played just a freaking awesome game. And I look at those 2 teams and think, no, the Fever are not taking one from either of them. So unless the standings shake out in a meaningfully different way, and with all due respect to Fever fans, I don't think there's a lot of point in evaluating their playoff prospects with this roster.
Just kind of stepping back for a second as we close out this bonus podcast, and obviously we'll have way more on Caitlin Clark's official season-ending announcement and the implications of it on the site and on this podcast going forward. But how do you just kind of think about the state of the WNBA, what her absence might mean for the playoffs, what it might mean from a business standpoint? And I know there's still data that we're collecting that we don't know, but do you have any just thoughts on what it all means league-wide now that Caitlin Clark's second season is officially in the books?
Yeah, I think the WNBA has seen meaningful growth this season, even relative to last year, which was this just phenomenal record-breaking year. This is going to be the highest single-year attendance since 2002. An average of about 11,000 per game, which is phenomenal considering a lot of teams don't even play in stadiums that seat 11,000. I should say a few teams, not a lot of teams. There have been, growth in viewership and just like ticket sales and all sorts of things, but I just kind of feels like a missed opportunity because we have already seen the data of how games change when Caitlin is in them, right? And you think about the WNBA putting all of these Indiana Fever, Chicago Sky games on national television, and in one of them, will there be both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese? And it's just been a story of this season with Angel missing so much time for Chicago and Caitlin missing all this time for Indiana. You mentioned earlier with the New York Liberty, Brianna Stewart missing about a month. Lisa Collier was out for a few weeks. Asia Wilson had a wrist injury earlier in the season. Like, all of these big names, big ticket draws have missed significant time. And when you have a hyper growth property that Kathy Engelbert likes to talk about, like, this was an opportunity to capitalize on what happened in 2024 and keep sustaining that growth. And I think W has sustained some of it, but like, there was a chance here to really keep rocketing up, and that hasn't happened. And, when we did our research on the TV deal and how it's possible that the WNBA could potentially add more money to that TV deal, one of the caveats was like, well, regular season ratings are great, but playoff numbers are where, networks really want. And we saw the playoff numbers last season were a little bit lower than some of the regular season numbers because the Indiana Fever lost in the first round. And once again, we're going to have a playoffs without Caitlin Clark. And as much as I do think that those numbers are going to go up from 2024, they're not going to be like the massive Clark-induced bump that could have potentially happened. And that's just kind of a bummer for the league, especially as it goes into this very important negotiating window. Bummer for everyone who's hoping to see like what Caitlin could have done in a postseason run.
No, I think that's exactly right, Sabrina. I'm glad you make the point about the regular season and the postseason because we still have seen, as you mentioned, that kind of sustaining momentum, the sustaining growth in a lot of ways. I mean, one metric that Sports Media Watch put out in the middle of August was that ABC finished its WNBA regular season slate of games. I think it was 12 games or so, with an average of 1.4 million viewers. That's up 13% from their 1.26 million over 8 games last year. And Caitlin Clark played in just 3 of the games this year, right? So that is not insignificant growth, certainly. But to your point about what could have been in the playoffs, yeah, there's a whole basketball analysis, but there is also a, who knows what the finals viewership would have been or what the conference finals viewership would have been had we gotten a thrilling 5-game series or a thrilling 7-game series against New York or Minnesota or Las Vegas. Like, those would have been must watch, I think, for the casual sports fan, no matter what else was on TV. People would have tuned in to see those games. And, I guess we'll now have to wait and see what those ratings are. And obviously it is unfortunate because we have certainly seen Caitlin Clark play at the highest level in the biggest stage and just, enchant fans. Like, think about her NCAA tournament runs at Iowa, not only the ratings, but just as a viewer of like just how magical those runs were. And so, yeah, it is definitely disappointing that we will miss out on that. I mean, do you think, I guess my next question too, about when the next time we see her is, because, this is like one open-ended question, and I'm sure we'll have some more conversations about this over the next few days. And so there's no reporting behind it, but I am now curious, especially if she does participate in Unrivaled this year, right? We have seen the success of Unrivaled in the winter. We've seen all the star players, minus Asia Wilson, really, who have flocked to this league in the winter. We know how well paid they are. Caitlin Clark's agent, she works with Excel Sports. It's the same agency that represents Nafisa Collier, one of the league's co-founders. Like, assuming that she is in full health, I do wonder if she now says, I want to get back into a competitive environment with a world-class training staff and a world-class facility and play with other WNBA players and just like be in the gym and compete. Like, I wonder if that is the next step in her offseason plan, versus just waiting until next April and saying, I'm not going to play a competitive game from July until May of next year. I don't know. Do you have a thought on if we'll see her there at all?
I mean, we don't have the numbers on this, but it seemed like Unrivaled was really hard on WNBA players. Like, I think about Brianna Stewart going in after suffering a bit of a knee. Yeah, a bit of a knee injury during the finals, and then aggravating that during Unrivaled, and now like having missed time during this WNBA season. Kalia Copper has suffered some time off. Like, think about all the big names who had to miss time during Unrivaled, and some of them carried into the WNBA regular season, but it just seems like a very physically taxing brand of basketball, and that doesn't feel like the kind of thing you want to step right back into after, missing all of this time. So to me, I think we're not going to see Caitlin Clark play again until she's in an Indiana Fever uniform, but I'm sure people would like if she played a little bit sooner than that.
Yeah, it's just a bummer, I guess, any which way you cut it, whether even if she comes back to Unrivaled, that, her season will be cut short, that kind of the lasting memory of her on court will be her in so much pain, walking off the floor against the Connecticut Sun in mid-July, that so much of the second half has just been her on the sideline, her watching All-Star, her, with Tyrese Halliburton. It's a shame for fans of Indiana sports to now have both of their star players not have the endings to the season that if you're an Indiana basketball fan, like, you certainly would have wanted. And I think that's unfortunate, whether you are a Caitlin Clark fan, an Indiana Fever fan, a WNBA fan, just a sports fan. You want to see great athletes competing at the highest level in the biggest moments. And now we know as of Thursday night that we will not get that. So that is all we have for you today. Be sure to tune into our regularly scheduled Friday episode, where we break down Angel Reese's recent comments, give out some made-up awards from this season, and chat with Cheyenne Parker-Tyus of the Las Vegas Aces about motherhood and the WNBA. But Sabreena, appreciate you jumping on, that we could break all this down. Some very important news that, we can now finally close the book on Caitlin Clark's second season. But until then, if you haven't already subscribed, please follow our show. And friends, if you're watching on YouTube, please also subscribe. Tell your friends to check us out. And while you're at it, give us a rating, drop a comment, What was your favorite Caitlin Clark memory of this season? How will you remember her second season in the WNBA? Of course, also head on over to our partner, the Yahoo Sports Hub, for more content at sports.yahoo.com/women's-sports. And on behalf of The Athletic, Sabreena Merchant, I'm Ben Pickman. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.